The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Gaia, the streaming TV service dedicated to exploring the cutting edge of metaphysics, ancient wisdom, and the unexplained. 5,000 years of wisdom on demand. Get your first month for only 99 cents. Visit Gaia.com/Jim. That's Gaia.com/Jim to see what's happening on the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. Thanks, Gaia. The Paranormal Podcast is also brought to you by Wink. Wink is offering our audience members who are 21 and over and who live in the U.S. a $20 credit plus free shipping on their first order of 4 bottles of wine as a new member of Wink. For a free bottle of wine with your order, go to trywink.com/Jim. That's TRYWINC.com/Jim. Thanks, Wink.
This is the Paranormal Podcast with Jim Harold.
Welcome to the Paranormal Podcast. I am Jim Harold and so glad to be with you once again. And I hope that you had a peaceful and happy Memorial Day. Sometimes I feel funny saying happy because it's a very somber occasion. But hopefully you did get an opportunity to enjoy it with family and friends, but yet still not forget and always remember the sacrifice made by those who made the ultimate sacrifice for we Americans, those of you who are in the States listening. We mustn't lose sight of that. And just a belated thank you. And nothing we can ever repay what all of these great servicemen and women have done for us. And we just appreciate it very, very much. Now, on to the show today. We start with J.M. DeBoard on dream interpretation. It's kind of strange timing. I've been having a lot of strange dreams lately. I was on some stomach medication, and I think it's made me go a little loopy. And then on part even more so than usual. And then on part 2, we've got the Treasure Keys to Christ's Return by Paul Blake Smith. Now, that will be controversial, and we don't shy away from controversy. I typically don't get into politics and religion. But if you're talking about the supernatural, certainly the second coming is supernatural. So we'll let Paul come on the show, present his theories and his thoughts. And as we do with all topics, we let you be the judge, not taking sides one way or the other. So stay tuned for that. And now on to the Paranormal Podcast. The topic of dreams, what do they mean? Are they just the wretched refuse of the day's remains? Or do they really mean something? Well, I think I know the answer according to our guest today, but we'll ask him about that. I'm talking about J.M. DeBoard. He is back on the show. He is known as Rad Owl, the Reddit dream expert on the popular website reddit.com. He is the author of Dreams 1, 2, 3, Remember, Interpret, and Live Your Dreams. He's a featured dream expert and dream interpreter on numerous media programs, including Coast to Coast AM, Darkness Radio, and The More Show. And we are so glad to have him back on the show. He has a brand new book out called The Dream Interpretation Dictionary, Symbols, Signs, and Meanings. J.M. DeBoard, welcome back to the program today.
Thank you, Mr. Harold. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, I was telling you off air, and that means I really, really mean it. This book is put out by Visible Ink Press, and I love what they do. We've had numerous books of theirs we've featured, Brad Steiger and Nick Redfern, and they're always kind of this dictionary/encyclopedia format. They're big books. And when you get one of these, we have to cycle through books here just because I get so many books, so I can't keep every book we get, although we're very appreciative of them to do the interviews and so forth. But the Visible Ink books I hang on to because they're great references, and I would say the same about this. If you're interested in dreams, this is a great book. J.M., what was the genesis of this book? What was kind of the goal of it?
Well, I wanted to write a dream dictionary because that is what people generally refer to when they want a reference for their dreams. If you were just somebody who suddenly gets an interest, I want to know more about my dreams, then what kind of book are you going to look for? And so I wanted to speak to that sort of general audience to give them an all-in-one reference source so they could have one book that they could use for years to come and refer to over and over again to understand their dream life. So I started writing a dictionary of dream symbols and realized that I could do more with it, that I could weave in the guide to figuring out your dreams, that I could weave in concepts that help you to understand the psyche and the process of dreaming, and that I could work in some of these teachings from some of the people that I've learned the most from, such as Dr. Carl Jung and the psychic Edgar Cayce, without necessarily having to get into the jargon that they use, which can sometimes turn people off. So I was really trying to turn the idea of a dream dictionary on its ear, because I have them here and I've read through them, and there are some times that I go, where do they come up with this stuff? You know, like they'll be like, well, frizzy hair means you have chaotic thoughts. And I'm like, well, it can mean that, but there are other possibilities, and they're not covering those possibilities. Plus, they're not teaching the reader how to draw these conclusions for themselves. So at heart, Jim, I'm a teacher, and I've been teaching people about their dreams for years. My work by now has reached millions of people. If you consider the massive platform at reddit.com and the, media programs and the books that I've put out. And really what I wanted to do was take my teaching to a new level so that I could weave it all into the book, make it user-friendly, make it available for people who don't have a background in dream psychology, yet go into the kind of depth that is enlightening for people who do have a background in dreams and interpretation and dream psychology. So I think that I did it. Some of the reviews have come back from people who are such as Robert Wagner and Susan Van Dorn, who are both dream experts, and they came back and said, hey, we're really impressed with what you did here. So I'm very happy, and I'm also very happy with my publisher, Visible Ink. They took a huge risk with this book, so I have to thank them for giving me the platform to get my teachings out there to the public.
Now, before we get into some meanings and some common dreams and those kind of things, here's a question I always have, and I kind of broached it in the introduction there. We all know that we have these crazy dreams where, we'll be at a store shopping for bananas, and then we'll have a dream we're sitting on a throne of bananas.
Right.
And I'm not talking about Twin Peaks. But anyway, so we'll have those kind of dreams. And then we have dreams that we think might be a little more meaningful, and that they're actually tapping into some kind of meaning. Do you feel that some dreams are just brain junk and other ones are meaningful? Do you buy into that?
This is a great place to start, Jim, because I get asked this question a lot, and my reply is that not all dreams are meaningful, that dreaming is a multi-layered process or phenomena or function of the mind. And you can have dreams that are early in your sleep, which tend to just be the mind sorting through memories, getting rid of junk, running bodily processes, and going through neurological processes called neuroplasticity, which is when your brain, the pathways, they've got these billions or trillions of pathways that are connecting the parts of your brain, and all the neural pathways connect together and into the different centers of the brain. And as you sleep, your brain is opening up and allowing new information to come in, and it's collating and processing, and then it's also trimming off some of those neural pathways because they're no longer needed. So you need to be able to release the day's information to kind of clear the memory banks and allow new information to come in the next day. So this is an essential process. It has to happen. When people don't sleep enough and they don't dream enough, then they tend to break down physically and mentally and emotionally. This is why sleep deprivation is used as a form of torture. It was used down in Guantanamo and places like that. So don't torture yourself, people. I'm telling you, make sure you get enough sleep. Now, during the second half of the night, what tends to happen is that the imagery, which was just sort of random and crazy, and it doesn't have a narrative or story, now it starts to weave together into these stories, and you can feel the significance because it engages you more. You remember these dreams better, and emotionally and personally, you engage more with these stories. And now you can start start to see a narrative structure to it. And for all of the writers and storytellers and screenwriters out there, they will recognize this idea of you start weaving together stories, and you take all the elements of it, such as your settings and your characters and, the symbols within those stories, and then the actions, the plot, the way that characters react, the arc of the story and the arc of the individual character stories. These all start to form together. And your dreams are great storytellers. They're master storytellers, and they use all of the tricks in the book, your backstory and your nested stories and metaphors and analogies and, all of these different ways that storytellers have used throughout the ages to convey information to people and to teach lessons and make points. Your dreams are doing the same thing. So once you can understand the dream as a story, then you can get into the interpretation process. So yeah, Jim, that is a great question. It's a great place to start. Not all dreams are meaningful. The ones that you engage with and remember the best, those tend to be the ones that are meaningful.
Now, when we talk about meaningful dreams, and of course, you've got the biological component of the brain. In addition to the biology of it, is there a spiritual piece? Is there a metaphysical piece? In other words, the brain has its biological processes, but is that partner to some corollary metaphysical process?
Absolutely. Not all dreams. In fact, I would put it towards the end of the list. If you have I don't want to call it a pecking order, but if you have from most frequent type of dream to least frequent, the most frequent are dreams that are about your body. It's your body giving you status updates. It's telling you what's going on in there. And the brain, of course, is part of the body. So you're getting status updates. And then you start going into more of the mind and the heart. What's going on in your emotions? What's going on in your thoughts? And then we get into spirit, because we're all, mind, body, spirit. So then you get into spirit, and spirit can lead you to other things where you are interacting with, call it the larger consciousness or whatever. Carl Jung talked about a collective unconscious, which is this part of it's a collective mind, and all of the experience of the human species going all the way back to our origins. It's all there. And I think what happens is that we open up to this. Most of the time we're closed off to it when we're awake and when we're in light stages of sleep. But when we get into the very, very deep stages of sleep and deep dreaming, we open up to the larger consciousness, the collective unconscious, and we start downloading information into ourselves that we need to help to improve ourselves. Dreaming it's multi-layered phenomena, and it really begins with helping you to learn and grow. And you can point towards, how the brain becomes, active while dreaming, and it goes through these process of learning and sorting and stuff. But then it goes deeper and deeper. And what it ends up with is that you are actually trying to learn how to unite your conscious mind with your unconscious mind, which is what Carl Jung called individuation. It means becoming a whole and complete person. And if you step back and you ask yourself, what are dreams trying to accomplish? That is the ultimate goal over the long term. So there's a daily process of dreaming that's going on, which is more, say, neurological and bodily and emotional. And then there's a long-term process of dream, which is really trying to marry you to your soul, which is an alchemical term called the marriage of the soul. Carl Jung referred to it also. So please don't be turned off by it. If you're, for any listeners out there that are turned off by religious language, this is just a way of describing something that is uniting your conscious mind with your unconscious mind. And when you do that, you become a whole, complete, integrated person.
Now, in terms of making our dreams work for us, many times I'll have a day where I remember that I had a dream and that it was something that stuck out to me, but I've forgotten it. You remember when you first wake up and then you forget it. Now, what I've heard from different people, and I believe you as well, is that really the key to start understanding all of this is the first step of a dream journal. Is that right?
Yeah, dream journaling and remembering your dreams. This is where people have the most difficulty. Of course, to interpret your dreams, you have to remember them first. And studies have shown that more than half of the public has very little recall, sometimes no recall. And they'll presume that they don't dream at all, but this isn't true. Everybody dreams. You have to dream. So the first step is to keep a dream journal and to practice remembering your dreams. I like to use the analogy of, how many people could get up out of their chair right now and go and run a mile. Okay, now that if you've been practicing running, then you could probably run a mile without too much of a difficulty with it. But if you're not practiced up at it, you would probably have difficulty running a mile. It's the same idea with dreams. The first time that when you first start getting into remembering your dreams, you're probably going to have some difficulty with it. You're just going to remember little bits and fragments. You might not remember anything at all. But if you practice it and you apply some of the techniques that I teach in my book and online at my blog, then you will start to have better recall, and then the ball gets rolling, and it'll go from having little fragments and pieces and scenes of dreams to being able to remember the entire story. And then it won't just be one dream, but it'll be several dreams. And really it all begins with keeping that dream journal, that notebook next to your bed. It reminds you, A, that you want to remember your dreams. B, it gives you the chance in the morning to be able to grab that pen and start writing, or grab your phone, turn on the voice recorder, start speaking into it. Get those memories out of you. If you need to just outline it and do keywords because many memories are coming back, that's okay. It'll jog your memory later, and that gets the ball rolling, and you will start to have more and more dream memories that come up, or at least better recall of those dream memories. And then you will start having the kind of depth of content and understanding of your dream stories that you can then take the step 2, which is go in and interpret the dreams. So I hope later that I can tell your listeners about my newsletter, the We Love Dreams newsletter, because I pack it with information that has all of these, tips for dream recall, and now what do you do with it? How do you interpret and understand the imagery and stuff like that? So maybe we can go over that later.
Well, actually, we can go over it later, but since we're doing it, how can people sign up to it, since you mentioned it?
Okay, so We Love Dreams newsletter. Type that into your favorite search engine. It should be the first result, and I'm J.M. DeBoard. So you can also go directly to dreams123.net/newsletter, or just go to the front page and there's a link from there. When you give me your first name and your email address, what will happen is you'll get a welcome email, and then I've set up an automated system that will continue to send you emails. Everything is private. I'm not going to spam you. Mostly what I'm sending you are links to my blog posts, my videos, my podcasts, my media interviews, and I give you this information in a structured way so that you can start walking through it step by step. And really where it begins is, hey, you got to remember your dreams. I have, a nice blog post about this that covers top 10 tips for remembering your dreams, and then it'll take you into the rest of it. So the We Love Dreams newsletter, type it into a search engine, and then you're ready for launch.
Well, after this break, we're going to talk more with J.M. DeBoard about dreams. We're going to talk about some specific symbols. We're going to talk about some common dreams, some dreams you really should pay attention to. And we'll be back right after this on the Paranormal Podcast. The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Gaia, the streaming TV service dedicated to exploring the cutting edge of metaphysics, ancient wisdom, and the unexplained. And keep listening, because I'm going to tell you how you can get your first month for only 99 cents. Now, if you're not familiar with Gaia, let me explain to you what it is. Now, if any of you, and most people by this time are streaming a lot of television programming and movies, and they're on those big services that we've all kind of heard about. And those services are great, but if you look at them, there might be here and there a documentary or something covering the unusual, the Fortean, but there's really nowhere in those areas can be found a central hub. But luckily, there is a streaming TV network that is specifically dedicated to the topics that we love, the paranormal, the strange, the Fortean, the metaphysical, and it is Gaia. And I've been telling you about it for the last few weeks, and you really need to check it out, because Gaia explores these topics that we love, and they're always providing viewers with tremendous new content, and this week is no exception. Now, for example, some of the shows, if you were a member of Gaia, that you could watch, The Acceleration of Time on Wisdom Teachings by David Wilcock. They examine the geometry at the infinitesimal and galactical levels of existence, and this research begins to pay off as they see how this energetic geometry affects the planets encircling the sun. How about this one? Antarctica, the new Area 51, that's on Cosmic Disclosure. And Corey Good brings forward new information coming out of Antarctica, revealing that it has become the new Area 51. George Norrie on his show, Beyond Belief, is going to talk to Jim Mars, who is fantastic, and he's going to talk about the history of the Illuminati. And there is so much more that you can enjoy. And it's kind of neat because Gaia has set up a special page for us as listeners to the Paranormal Podcast, and you can get little samplings of different things. You can go over to Gaia.com/Jim. That's Gaia.com/Jim. And there you'll see a sampling and get to watch some clips, no charge, just to get a sense of what Gaia is all about. For example, I'm looking here, Nostradamus' prophecies for our time with John Hogue on Beyond Belief, or revealing the original secret space vehicles with Mark McCandlish. And that one has over 216,000 views. So check all that out over at Gaia.com/Jim. That's Gaia.com/Jim. And then once you've checked it out, I think you're going to say, 99 cents for a month of this? I've got to try it. So go up to the top of that page at Gaia.com/Jim and click on the little orange sign up button in the upper right-hand corner. And there you can sign up and give Gaia a try for only 99 cents per month. It is a fantastic deal. And I think once you give it a try, you are going to love it. So go over to Gaia.com/Jim. That's GAIA.com/Jim to see what's happening on the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. Thanks, Gaia. We're back on the Paranormal Podcast. Our guest is J.M. DeBoard. The book is The Dream Interpretation Dictionary, Symbols, Signs, and Meanings. And J.M., I'm sure you run into this, having been so active on Reddit and have done so many sessions and interpretations. What are some of the more common dreams that you hear?
Well, I tell you, I was just doing a presentation at Canyon Ranch Health Spa Sunday, and the theme that I was asked about by a dentist was she gets asked a lot about teeth falling out and crumbling. And so when you have something like that happens in a dream, what you want to begin with, the generating ideas based on what is that part of the body used for? Or what is that object, if it's a car or a plane or whatever. But let's stick with teeth for now. Teeth are used, first of all, for presentation. When you smile, you can tell a lot about a person by the condition of their teeth. So if you have bad condition in your teeth, it can mean that you're putting forth a bad image. If your teeth fall out, it is literally you are losing part of your face if a tooth falls out. What does loss of face mean? It means you've done something to harm your image or your reputation. But teeth go further. Teeth are used for speaking. My tongue is rolling off the back of my teeth right now to be able to create certain sounds. So if your teeth are falling out, it can affect your ability to speak. Well, now take that idea further. Speaking is related to articulation. Articulation is how you express yourself. You might have difficulty expressing yourself if your teeth fall out. There are other things such as teeth cracking, and that can be nervousness and stress. Sometimes it means that you're actually grinding your teeth as you sleep, and that you are feeling that, and the nerves are speaking, into your body and into your brain, and you're dreaming, so your brain is responding by producing dream imagery that's related to your teeth, combined with the fact that you're grinding them and you're starting to get nervous about possibly harming your teeth. And so then it turns into dream imagery of your teeth cracking and falling out. Now, some other common imagery is driving in a car. It is such a great metaphor and versatile metaphor for talking about the daily progress and movements of your life. You have, when you control the steering wheel and the gas and the brake pedals, now you're talking about analogies and metaphors you could make for control of your life, the direction that it is going. When you use the gas, it can mean how much energy are you putting forth. When you use the brakes, it can mean that you want to slow something down. Like say, for instance, that you start a relationship and it just rockets right out of the starting gates. And now you're starting to feel a little uncomfortable about the pace that this relationship is going. So what are you trying to do in your dream as you're pressing on the brake pedal, but it's not working because you're unable to slow down the relationship? Or maybe it does work and it means that you are able to step back and say, whoa, let's slow this down here. Let's not jump into things, right? So another theme that comes up a lot is flying, and specifically flying in a plane. In planes, you begin with the idea, what is a plane when you take a flight? Usually it is to reach some kind of a special destination. It's not just like hopping in your car to go to the store or go to work. You know, when you get on a plane, it's because there's a special destination that you have in mind. And so think in the larger terms of where do you want to end up in your life? What are the more distant destinations that you want to reach? And again, think of it as a personal destination that you want to reach. I've had this many times in my dreams related to my career as an author. I'll dream about trying to fly to Paris. Because why Paris? Because it is a city associated with intellectual thought and with literature. And by trying to get to Paris, what the dream is really saying is that I'm trying to get to this goal in my life of being an author who is recognized as a dream expert, which then also ties in with knowledge, intelligence, you know, stuff like that. Many times in my dreams, it's talking about the obstacles to getting there, such as being able to buy a ticket or bringing my passport with me. My passport can mean that I'm giving myself the personal permission to be able to do this. Maybe there's something inside of me that is resisting the idea of being a larger public figure. You know, it starts to take away your privacy, and suddenly your Facebook account's exploding with people wanting to know about their dreams, you know, and you're going, hey, I used to have those 2 hours a day for being able to exercise, but now I'm responding to emails. I'm sure you know what that's like, Jim.
Yep.
I mean, I hear your name everywhere as a podcaster, and you're very well known now. So, you know, it really starts to eat at you, and now new issues come up, such as how am I going to be able to protect my private life? So, you know, these themes come up in the dreams, but the overall idea is that I'm trying to fly to a new city, and that city is associated with where I'm trying to get to in my life. Can you think of any others that you want to know about common dream themes or symbols?
Well, for example, my wife said the other day that she dreamed of a wedding, and the first thing she said, "Oh, that means death." And of course, being the optimist that she is, so wedding, that's a good one. What about weddings?
You know, and this gives me a chance to tell your listeners why I wrote this book, was because I ran across a lot of bad information out there. You know, you can wake up from a dream and you go to your favorite search engine and you start typing in, you know, well, what does it mean to dream about a wedding? And the number one result says, you're going to die, you know, and you're like, oh no, I don't want to die, you know. Or I had one in a workshop that I gave where a lady talked about losing a tooth, meaning she's going to lose a close loved one. Wow. And, you know, I'm like, wow. You know, well, there are some cultural traditions where that is associated with, especially losing a molar, because it's deeply embedded in your mouth and your loved ones are deeply embedded in your life. So this is the way that the symbolism is created. But out of hundreds of dreams that I've interpreted that feature teeth, only a few of them had anything to do with losing a loved one. So I wanted to give readers better information than just going online and taking the random crapshoot and hoping that you can come up with good information. So when you begin with a wedding, what is a wedding? Break it down to its simplest ideas. This is one of the first steps of dream interpretation. Well, in simplest terms, a wedding is a commitment. So you could ask yourself, if you have a wedding, what are you being asked to commit to? Or what are you deciding that you want to commit to? It could be deciding that you're going to commit to a new exercise routine, or you've decided that you want to push more to advance your career, or you have a relationship like a friendship that's developing. And there comes a point where you have to make a decision. Do I want to be closer with this person, or are they going to stay in that outer circle of friends? These are the kinds of things that dreams can refer to in a wedding. And ultimately, many dreams are about what's going on in your inner life. So if you make a commitment to learning more about yourself and developing yourself as a person and integrating your personality into a cohesive whole, you can dream about it as a wedding, because what you're really doing is marrying another side. You're marrying your ego to other parts of the psyche, which of course the psyche is a collective. A lot of people think of themselves as an I, when it's really, they're better described as a we, with the ego as sort of the CEO of many different departments, and those departments come together, and they can either decide to accept the leadership of the ego, or they can decide to rebel against it, in which case you end up with a lot of inner, conflict inside of yourself. So really, when you talk about a wedding, what you're talking about is some type of commitment or union.
Very interesting. I love that. I'll have to tell her not to worry so much.
Yeah, I don't think it means she's gonna die. I really don't know where that comes from. I'm brainstorming here, trying to think of where someone could come up with that idea from it. And I don't see any connections. Weddings are usually very positive and indicate new things going on in your life.
My wife tends to be a pessimist. I can just tell you that. But anyway,
okay.
Well, and again, I think this points to the idea that in dreams, a cigar isn't necessarily a cigar. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, Freud's famous quote that a cigar is sometimes just a cigar, meaning it's not a phallic symbol, that sometimes your dream imagery is pretty straightforward as opposed to having some kind of deep meaning or symbolic meaning to it.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't. I was flipping through and I saw the term X. If somebody has a dream of their ex, and then you might think, well, naturally I'm thinking about that person. But that's not necessarily the case. That was one where it could mean a whole range of different things.
Yeah, and if you refer to my dream dictionary, which it sounds like you did, you see how extensive that entry is, because you can't just give a couple of paragraphs, a few sentences to try to describe what that could mean as symbolism, because it's so personal.
Right.
And it is also a very common theme, as a moderator at Reddit, where I'm at the Dreams Forum, and I get a lot of people, this is kind of a younger crowd, and, they're going in and out of relationships, and they have these new experiences, and they tend to dream about their exes, and they think that it means something like, oh, well, this means that they're ready to get back together with me, and I should maybe call them or send them a message, and I'm like, no. Actually, your dream might mean just the opposite. It might mean that you're finally ready to close the door on that relationship, that there's still part of you that's left behind in the past. So you don't want to open up that door again. The dream is actually saying the opposite. Or it could have something to do with, let's say, what you learned from that relationship. We're always going through this process of learning about ourselves and learning from our experiences. And relationships are great teachers, and they tend to affect us very deeply, especially when we fall in love and then we fall out of love or something traumatic happens in the relationship. So what you want to maybe think of is, am I trying to do things better this time? Am I trying to learn from this relationship, especially if it's a recurring dream? It's meaning there is something from the past that is unresolved, or something that you need to learn to be able to do things better in the present and in the future. You don't want to repeat the same mistakes again when you go into your next relationship. So, and you want to know the signs to look for when maybe the relationship is getting shaky, or the person that you're thinking about getting involved with maybe isn't the best person for you. We do tend to repeat patterns, especially in love. So your dreams, by showing you your ex, they're really trying to help you to learn from the experience. Now, another way that this manifests is sometimes you are in a new relationship and somehow you're reminded of the old relationship. Your ex might have been someone that you really loved, and that for some reason things didn't work out, or the person had to leave your life for some reason, or you had to leave their life. And it's not necessarily a bad experience. You can be reminded of the good things about that relationship, and you can be in new relationships that are reminding you of the old relationship and that person that you were with. So you want to pay attention when your dreams bring up your ex, because it could be giving you some really valuable information that's going to help you to learn more about the person you're getting involved with now, more about yourself and how you're responding, especially emotionally, and how to learn from the past so that you can have better relationships in the present.
Does the dream world ever come across with a dream where it's trying to warn you or say, really pay attention to this? Does that happen? And if so, what are like the telltale signs of a dream that you really, really need to take heed of?
It does. Your dreams are very good at seeing patterns, and they're very good at seeing how things are developing, and they're very good at learning from the past so that you can do better in the present and in the future. So if you have a recurring dream, that is the first sign that a message is trying to get through to you. And your dream is either going to use the same theme and show it in different scenarios, different ways of presenting the story to you, or it's going to show you the same story over and over again. I call those Groundhog Day dreams because you tend to get to the end of the dream, you have a choice to make, and if you make the same choice, then you just go right back to the beginning. And that's exactly what happens to Bill Murray in the story until he decides that he's going to do things differently so that he can have a different outcome. And what that can be saying is that you are trying to do things the same way and you're expecting a different outcome. But of course, you're going to get the same outcome because you're not doing things differently. You're not changing. You're resisting that change, or you're not learning from your experiences. So that can be the first sign that a recurring dream is that something is trying to get through to you, that there's a message or there's a warning. The other thing is that when you have dreams that warn you about something, they tend to be more vivid and realistic. The street that you're walking down before the car runs the red light and you're in the crosswalk is a street that you recognize from your daily life, or it's a street that you will be on in the future and you haven't been there yet. Like, let's say that you're going to take a vacation to Rome, and you've never been to Rome before. And I use Rome as an example because they have notoriously bad drivers there. So you dream that you're walking down the street in Rome and suddenly a car veers off onto the sidewalk and there you are facing the bumper, and that's where the dream leaves off. And you wake up and your heart is pounding and you are sweating and you have this very strong reaction to the imagery in the dream. Now, if it's symbolism for something that's going on in your life, like maybe you are going straight towards some kind of dead end in your life, or you're about to crash into something or someone, there's some kind of traumatic thing that's going on in your life. Usually, if that's the case, you can make the connection, especially once you've been practicing dream work for a while. You'll start to really feel your way through the dream, and you can tell the difference between a dream that is speaking to something that is ongoing or just happened in your life, or a dream that is warning you about what's going on in the future. Now, these are called precognitive dreams. When you dream about a future event and there's no other way that you could know that this event is going to happen, and then it comes to pass, it's called a precognitive dream. And if you type into your favorite search engine, precognitive or ordinary dream, you will probably run across as the number one result a very popular post I have on my website, which is about this subject. And I walk the readers through the process of being able to differentiate between a dream that is personal and symbolic, and it's just speaking to what's going on in your life, and a dream that is warning you about something that could happen in the future. And Jim, I emphasize could, because precognition is not prophecy. It's what precognition is doing is it's reading the probabilities for the future, and it's giving you the information you need ahead of time to decide that you want to have a better or a different outcome than what you saw in the dream. So when you are walking down the sidewalk in Rome and you start to recognize the scene and you go, hey, I think I dreamed about this, it's time to start looking out for that car that's going out of control, because I tell you from experience, personal experience, and from researching this subject very deeply, that there are thousands of reports that you can find just with a few days of depth of looking into this and reading books such as The Gift from Sally Ryan Feather, and digging into the work of people like physicist Russell Targ and researcher Ian Wilson. They have documented thousands of these cases of people who've been warned ahead of time in dreams that there is something that could happen, and you should heed the warning because you have an opportunity to change what that outcome could or is going to be.
It's interesting because I'll give people a little peek behind the scenes here. A lot of times when I'm interviewing people, I have some idea what I'm going to ask, but I don't make a list of questions per se. I don't know if that's good or bad. Try to be more conversational. But when something comes to mind, I have some index cards here, and I'll just write down one word. And the word that I wrote down, and this is pretty ironic, right before you start talking about precognition, was premonitions.
Yeah. Yep.
So that's pretty weird that you came up with that.
It's all related into the same phenomena. You might think of a premonition as a precognitive experience that happens while you are awake. See, when you're dreaming, your senses are shut down and you're more open to receiving this information. You know, the signal is coming through more clearly, but you can have these signals come to you at any time. It's just usually you are too distracted to be able to fully process the information. So it waits until you're asleep. And anything that was missed during the day, your dreams tend to focus first on those things that are important to you that you missed. We're constantly being bombarded with sensory information. And I read somewhere that, only a small percentage of the information, like 1% or 2% of the information that is constantly coming into you, only that small percentage of it is actually being fully processed by your rational mind. The rest of it is just sort of hitting you subconsciously. So you might be getting information such as a premonition, which is really precognition while you are awake. In my first book, Dreams 1, 2, 3, I used a great example of a mother who dreamed that there was a small white pill that was underneath the lip of her couch. She saw it very clearly in her dream, and her first reaction was, if my baby got a hold of that, because she had a toddler that was in the crawling stage, she thought, if my baby got a hold of that and ate that pill, that could be a disaster. So she woke up in the morning and the dream was very strongly on her mind. And she said, okay, I need to go check. And sure enough, she went downstairs, looked up underneath the couch, and right there was a small white pill that was a powerful sedative.
Wow. That
she realized would be, it might make an adult drowsy, but for, let's say a 20-pound child, that it could be a trip to the ER or worse, right? So she thanked herself for paying attention to that dream. Now, was it precognition? Or did she actually see the pill out of the corner of her eye? Like, let's say she was vacuuming or something that day, and she caught it out of the corner of her eye, but there was, the phone's ringing, the baby's crying, and she's thinking about something all at the same time, and she doesn't have a chance to fully process the fact that that's a pill, that's a prescription pill, and that could be something that's harmful to my baby. And so at that night, when her senses are shut down, her dreaming mind has an opportunity to bring it front and center and make her aware of it. Or was it precognition? It's hard to say, but either way, she was given a warning, and it was very wise of her to listen to the dream. And she could have had a premonition of sorts, which is really just the same thing except as a precognition, except for it happens while you're awake.
Very cool. I was going to ask you for examples. So once again, you the irony keeps following.
We were on the same wavelength.
Exactly.
Awesome.
You're beaming across the miles. Well, the book is The Dream Interpretation Dictionary, Symbols, Signs, and Meanings. Our guest has been J.M. DeBoard. J.M., where can people pick up this book? And again, please repeat where people can check out your email, newsletter, and everything else you do.
Absolutely. It's available for pre-order right now at Amazon, and it's actually discounted by like 25% or something like that. So the official release date is June 13th. It is being distributed out into bookstores across the country, really across the world. And of course, it will be in other online outlets such as, Barnes and Noble and Aid Books and places like that that carry new books. It's going to be out there. So it's The Dream Interpretation Dictionary, Symbols, Signs, and Meanings by J.M. DeBoard. I have it on my website, of course. If you go to dreams123.net, there's a link right from there that can take a reader right to places where they can buy the book. I highly encourage your readers to go to dreams123.net because I have a collection of years of information. I've put there many of the questions that I'm asked as a dream expert. I've decided, hey, I need to write this stuff down instead of repeating myself over and over and over again, so I went ahead and I put a lot of this stuff into articles and blog posts that I've posted there. So really begin there. I'm on Facebook, of course. If you look up Interpret Dreams at Facebook, then they can, your listeners can find me there. And in fact, after my last interview with you, Jim, I had a great response. There were people, some of your listeners came to Facebook and spoke with me there and took an interest in my work. So I was very, happy for that. and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak to your listeners and to, spread the good word that dreams really are meaningful and that there's a lot that you can gain from paying attention to them and, putting some effort into understanding and interpreting them.
Yes, and the book is The Dream Interpretation Dictionary, Symbols, Signs, and Meanings, and the author is J.M. DeBoard, and he has been our guest today. J.M., thank you for the kind words, and thank you for being on the show again.
Mr. Harold, the pleasure is all mine, and best of luck to you and ongoing into the future.
Well, I certainly enjoyed that interview. I hope that you did as well. Now, stay tuned. Paul Blake Smith will be up talking about the second coming right after this. The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Wink. Wink is targeting a new generation of wine drinkers who want to do away with the pretense and simply enjoy reasonably priced great wine. I love it because until Wink, they used to be called Club W, but before these guys came along, wine kind of intimidated me, but no longer the case. I enjoy wine, and this is a great time of the year because we're coming up on the summer, and you're going to have friends over, you're going to entertain, and wouldn't it be nice to have several bottles of wine at the ready and kind of make you look like a connoisseur, but you're just learning through Wink? That's why I love it so much, because Wink custom tailors wines to your tastes and delivers 3 bottles of wine each month to your doorstep for $39 plus a flat $6 shipping rate. All you have to do, you don't have to know anything about wine. I didn't know anything about wine. Visit Wink and take their 20-second palate profile quiz to get instant wine recommendations based on your unique profile. You tell them, they ask you, do you like to eat this? Do you like this taste? Do you like that taste? And then it spits out a recommendation, and it's really pretty neat. Now, the price point for most wines is extremely affordable, $13. So by signing up with Wink, you're getting your first bottle for free. Now, Wink is offering our audience members who are 21 and over and who live in the United States a $20 credit plus free shipping on your first order of 4 bottles of wine as a new member of Wink. And I absolutely love it. I've been enjoying a bottle of One from the Quiver. And they've got these neat kind of funky names, but it's great wine. This wine actually is from Argentina. And very, very neat stuff. So I want you to try it. I think you will enjoy it. It's great for entertaining. I love it. And now I feel like I'm building up a little bit of a collection. Very affordable. And when friends come over and I can offer a bottle of wine, and it's not things that you regularly see in the stores either. So that's kind of cool too. And if you go over to the Wink website, they give you all this background. You can watch these very concise videos that teach you about the different wines. It's very cool. So to receive a $20 credit and free shipping on 4 bottles of wine on your first order, go to trywink.com/Jim. That's trywinc.com/Jim. I think that you will love it. Thanks, Wink. Our guest is a return guest. He's been on our UFO program, but today we're going to talk about something totally different. In fact, maybe something different than we've ever talked about on the show. Our guest is Paul Blake Smith, and he has a new novel out called The Treasure Keys to Christ's Return. And even though it is a novel, it is based on the premise that the second coming of Jesus Christ is upon us. And some people out there might be listening now and say, Jim's getting religious on us, and we're doing a show. We're not doing a show on religion. You're doing a show on the supernatural. Well, whether you agree or not with Paul's assertion, I can't think of anything much more supernatural than the second coming of Jesus Christ. And like anything we do, whether you believe or you don't believe, we hear the theories out and let the audience decide. And I thought this was perfectly appropriate for the Paranormal Podcast, and we're so glad to have Paul Smith with us. The book, again, is The Treasure Keys to Christ's Return. Paul, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on. And while we're right up front and honest with each other, I'll tell you I'm not a religious person, and I'm not a member of any church. I would not even call myself a Jesus freak or a Jesus fanatic. However, I'm quite familiar with the prophecies of Edgar Cayce, a little of Nostradamus, and a little of Ruth Montgomery and her spirit guides. I used to correspond with her back in the 80s and early 90s. She passed away in 2001. And I think what I have to put together in this novel and talk to you about today will be quite interesting and maybe a little scary.
Okay, well, we're all for that. So I guess, and you kind of answered it there, but what inspired you to write this book, not being what you call a Jesus freak? Why did you say this is a book I want to write?
Well, back in November, I had just about finished all of my publicity for my second book on the Cape Girardeau UFO crash. And I was casting about what am I going to write next? And I'd had the various plot threads in my mind and notes hanging around my desk here about a novel I've been wanting to put together for many years. Then one night in mid-November, I had a most unusual, remarkable dream. And I woke up from the middle of it, or in the middle of the night, kind of shaken and a little scared, I have to admit. I'll tell you what it was, but first let me preface this remark by mentioning that there's a reporter named Kirsten Powers for CNN. She used to be with Fox News, who reported the same thing happened to her, almost exactly, in 2006. Mine happened 10 years later. Kirsten, at the time, was an atheist. While I'm a general believer in Christ, I'm not a member of any particular church. Well, anyway, I woke up in the middle of the night from a very vivid dream in which I met Jesus Christ. And he spoke to me. He touched me, and he spoke to me. And he turned to me in a robe out in the desert, and he said, "Christ is your Redeemer always." And I could tell you exactly how he looked and what the conditions were and what he was wearing. And it was your typical hair parted in the center and a beard and mustache. And I was so stunned. It was so incredibly real. And this is what Kirsten Powers reports in her dream. It was both a dream and yet a real experience that I was just electrified. I just woke up and was stunned. And I've never experienced anything like this before. And really not since that time. And that's what Kirsten Powers also says. So I learned about Kirsten Powers about 2 months ago. I finally decided to look this up. Is there anyone else having dreams like this? And only a few that I can find. And so I don't know the grand overall meaning, but I do know what I experienced. And that gave me the final tipping point to create this novel, which was about various prophecies that point to our future and the return of Christ.
Now, do you think that some way that dream was to achieve that dream was delivered unto you for just this reason, to inspire you to write this book?
I don't know, and I really cannot make that claim. Jesus did not say to me or anyone else in the dream, "You need to write this book." He didn't say that at all. However, I thought, well, that's the last straw, if you want to put it that way. And I'm going to get this novel put together in all of these different prophecies. I actually left out two prophets who point to the return of Christ, and I can get to those. I don't know too much about those two, but I do know the three main biggies. And then I go into, in the book, what did Jesus say to his disciples about his return? And he gave them a kind of top 10 list, is the way I put it, of the conditions that would be in place just before his return. And you may have seen this on television with televangelists, or heard your minister maybe many times saying Christ is coming back. It's in the Bible. It's in the New Testament. And yes, I rather agree with that. He went down a list of pretty scary sounding things that are going on every day around the world. And I've been finding, to my surprise and dismay, that a lot of these factors are accelerating. They're getting worse and more noticeable. And I could go into that in more detail. But I think the key phrase at the very end is that Jesus told his disciples, "See that you are not troubled, for these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For these are just the beginning of sorrows," which is an astounding statement. Like, these things aren't bad enough. It's going to be getting worse, and then he'll come back. So something very big, you would assume, logically, is headed our way after all of these signs that are going on around us right now.
Well, I have to kind of put out on the table my background a little bit and kind of, and I may have mentioned this to the listeners to some extent, but maybe not in this context. When I went to high school, it seems like a million years ago, but I went to a very kind of fundamentalist Christian high school. And they really pushed the fact, in their view, that the return of Jesus was imminent. You know, that any time that Jesus may come, and they were believers in the concept of the rapture, which the rapture specifically, and I may be wrong on this, but I don't believe it's specifically the 7-year tribulation, 3.5 better years and 3.5 awful years is specifically, or at least the rapture piece, I don't think is specifically spelled out in the Bible. I could be wrong about that. I'm not a biblical historian. But the point was, that was their theory, that one day you'd be walking along and all of these people would disappear. The believers would be taken up and spirited away, and there would be 3.5 years where, you know, things were, you know, this weird thing happened, but everything was kind of cool, and you'd get the mark of the beast so you could buy and sell. And then in the next 3.5 would be just awful and hellacious. That was kind of what I was taught. And I know a lot of people are taught that. Does what you're proposing, does that map to that, or is there a different view of the return of Christ?
A different view. I've read and heard of that view many times. I don't particularly ascribe to it, but I will say, who knows? Maybe that will happen. I am not the world's leading expert or authority. In doing a little research on the rapture, I understand that many Catholics and Protestants do not adhere to that policy at all. And many Christians in general just kind of scoff or say, well, okay, sure. But to me, that is not what my reading about in other prophecies and how I interpret things are going to be coming along. But like I say, I'll leave an open mind, and who knows? Maybe we'll all just vanish and come back later. But I find that a little hard to believe. The Bible is so open to interpretation.
Yes.
Except for the part where Jesus did lay out very specific things about conditions before his return. He talked about wars and rumors of war, famine, disease, and pestilence. There would be earthquakes happening in diverse places. False religions and false prophets would be out loose in the world, misleading people. People's love and would wax cold. With a lot of people would be turned away from being kind and generous, and nation will rise against nation, and there will be wars, and the gospel will be preached around the world. Well, almost all of that is happening now. So we can almost taste the sense in the air, or smell it, or breathe it in, that we are in times like no other, and the conditions are right for his return. But then you have to ask, well, how would this possibly happen? People today and entire nations are armed to the teeth with high-tech weapons and biological agents, chemical warfare weapons, and, you know, guns and grenades and bombs. How could Jesus possibly come back in today's world? And I think I may have the answer as I get into my book, that it will be a very different world once he gets here. But I just don't believe in the rapture per se.
And I would say, you know, as time has gone on, I wouldn't say that I believe in it either, but it is, and I don't mean to cast aspersions, but it was somewhat traumatic as a teenager to be told that, you know, if you don't believe, you're going to be left behind and have this horrible fate, and you have to get the mark of the beast and all of this stuff. I mean, it was really traumatic. You know, I think that experience, frankly, even though I still consider myself of the Christian faith, has kind of ruined me to the faith, that it so confused. No, seriously, it so confused me as a young teenager that I still hold a lot of those kind of things. Like, if I don't do X, Y, Z, I'm going to, as they used to say, burn in a devil's hell and things like that. And my wife, who is Catholic, we have conversations about this, the time, and that experience kind of ruined me to the church. But anyway, that's my story. It's not the story of this book. So talk to us how you do envision the return of Christ. What do you see coming based on your research and the prophecies that you've been interested in and researched?
I don't put a time frame on it, and I think no one knows the day and the hour of the return. That's quite true. Not even the angels on high, it says in the Bible. I do know that. But I would think within the next 10, 15, or 20 years at the outset, we would be looking at this. And I go to the world of science, because the world of prophecy from these three different sources I've mentioned, Edgar Cayce, Ruth Montgomery, and Nostradamus, all say that the Earth is going to slurp over onto its side, tilt over in a polar shift disaster. And in the aftermath, people will be banding together. They won't be warring and fighting. They won't be sitting around watching video games, violent video games and violent movies. We will be rebuilding our society after a great deal of destruction from this global calamity. And into that atmosphere of cooperation and togetherness, then will come the birth of Christ. So I looked at the world of science, and I was rather astounded and depressed by what I saw and read. For instance, this spring, a new report shows from scientists that the world's oceans are now 13% warmer, far warmer than what scientists originally thought. Everything is accelerating, and now we've even lost two-thirds of the Great Barrier Reef because of warm ocean temperatures. We are literally killing off marine life, both plant and animal, and this is accelerating within the last few years. And what does this have to do with the return of Jesus? The polar ice caps are melting at an alarming rate. I was almost astounded to find out some of this in doing research over the past 5 or 6 months. And it's far worse than what scientists figured in the 1990s, where we could really lead to a lopsided planet where we could slip over onto our side in space, that these prophecies given 50, 60 years ago might actually turn out to be true. And it's becoming something that scientists are greatly worried about.
I just feel, and sometimes, I think there's been a long history of people believing that the end of the world was coming in their particular time. So right. I don't think this is new, but I do believe sometimes when I look at things, when you look at the proliferation of nuclear weapons, when you look at the proliferation of chemical weapons, you look at climate change, even if you're not a believer that it's caused by man, I think there's reason to believe that there is climate change going on. Now, what's causing it, again, there is some people say it's settled science. Some people say there's cause for debate, but there is a belief that climate change, I believe there was something in the Bible along the lines, you wouldn't know the time, you wouldn't know the season, but by the changing of the leaves. And I believe, and this is a long time back, and it seems like we're getting to this point here in Ohio, where I'm from. We had the warmest April in recorded history. Right. And the weather forecasters come on and say, don't plant those tomato plants yet because it's still too early. You've been fooled by this warm weather. So it just seems to me we're at a point of history where something's got to give. What that something is, I don't know. Is there going to be a massive world war? There's a lot of instability. All you got to look is North Korea and what's going on. I mean, we're probably closer to war on the Korean Peninsula since we've been since the ceasefire after the first Korean War. Right. There's so many flashpoints, and all it takes is one person to make a miscalculation, and we've got a nuclear exchange. It does have that feel like something's got to give, doesn't it?
It sure does, and I would almost hope it would come from nature, not man, because if it comes from man, it's probably something really horrific like nuclear war, radiation fallout, the spread of diseases like you see in the movies. And one of the things that I researched and found out that's going on now is the Center for Disease Control is reporting for the first time, it is actually a fact and not theory anymore, that there are diseases out there that we have no vaccine and no cure, and if they really take off, they could kill millions of people. And that's something like strains of the Ebola, the Zika virus, and so forth, that in the past they have said, well, this is only in theory. Unfortunately, the time has hit us where this is actually real now. And that's just one example of what I'm saying, that things are accelerating. There's a clip you can go to from the Weather Channel in April of last year. And the host comes on and he says, did you know that climate change might actually be affecting the Earth's axis? And there were a number of stories 1 year ago. Melting ice is causing the Earth's axis to shift already. It's already gone a few centimeters off its normal rotational spin. And so this is, once again, another tipping point. I put it in the book and tried to be as subtle as possible, but it is the whole crux on which the return of Christ could be, and that we will have this global disaster, but there will be wars and even rumors of wars going on at the time when it happens, and then people will band together and Christ can come back without fear of some lone nut shooting him or entire nations gathering their nuclear weapons and, nations that are not friendly towards Christianity. So it's open to interpretation for many reasons, the Bible. But Edgar Cayce was very specific, and so were the Ruth Montgomery Spirit Guides. They produced entire series of best-selling books mentioning the Earth was going to slip over on its axis as far back as 1971. And repeatedly stated, this is coming for man's future. You better prepare for it. And now we're getting closer and closer till that looks like it could well be reality.
I mean, if that happened, what would physically happen to the Earth and people on it if we had this axis shift?
Not good news, I can tell you that. The Earth's, according to the Ruth Montgomery Guides, who described what they feel or what they foresee coming. Entire continents will be shaking. There will be volcanic activity, and we'll even see some volcanoes pop up close to the very event itself that are cones that come out of the flat ground and start spewing lava, and other old volcanoes spewing lava. And this will cause the Earth to shake so much we'll have tidal waves on all the coastlines. They foresee a president of the United States who will listen to the scientists at this time and warn people that, yes, it appears a global disaster is coming. Everyone get away from the sea coasts. There will be a mass evacuation at that time. Supposedly this is coming in the next decade or two, and that we will have high winds sweep the planet as the event actually happens. The Earth will continue to spin around, but it'll be slipped over and have a new angle towards the sun in our rotation around the sun, and life will go on. However, yes, there will be casualties and there'll be a mess to clean up, but they say in some areas power will be fairly quickly restored and people will start to rebuild their homes and businesses, and you'll have to start planting crops if you're in a new climate and it's the right season. You might be knocked out of your entire season. They said that, for example, Northern America and Canada will be much more seasonably temperate and good for planting crops in that area. So this would be an enormous event should it indeed occur. And we have to keep our eyes on the science reports that talk about global warming and the incredibly rapid melting of our ice caps.
Now, in terms of the return of Christ, how would that unfold from the prophecies that you've reviewed in what you think may be in store?
Well, certainly the Bible tells us that Christ will return, and he promises this. And of course, as mentioned, we have this kind of top 10 list that is sadly going on here today. And then Edgar Cayce said that he would return just as you have seen him go. You will see him return, and he will walk and talk amongst men in groups and men in masses and will not be harmed. It will be the biblical 1,000 years of peace. It's a wonderful, rosy picture of the future if we can just get past this global event that is allegedly coming. The Ruth Montgomery Guides say that he will be born, as he was last time, to a woman in the Middle East, I would assume a virgin, and that he will grow up and become the Christ, the anointed one. It will be obvious to all. There will be omens and portents that will, signs that will show it, and everyone will agree, and there will be a global government based on Christ and God's wishes. And it's just a really wonderful time in which people will unite to have one currency and one language so we can all get along instead of having quite a great deal of division and anger amongst us as we see in today's world.
So why did you decide to put this in the context of a novel, of a fictional story, as opposed to maybe doing a non-fictional treatment? Where do you think that came in, and how did that kind of maybe provide a better platform for this information?
I appreciate nonfiction, and I wrote 2 books on the Cape Girardeau UFO crash that were nonfiction, but I wanted to try my hand at creative fiction writing. I've been writing a few screenplays of that nature over the years, and I've got some other books that I've written, one of which is a humorous novel, a comedy novel, but I wanted to pick up some various plot threads I had and put together a creative novel that gets people thinking, and Christians especially, because it is the great prophecy that I think more people should talk about and ponder amongst themselves seriously, is that the conditions are becoming more and more ripe. The world's getting even crazier. I'll give you another example. Jesus talked about there would be famine in the conditions just before the end. And I looked it up, and it says that nearly 800 million people on Earth now live in hunger. That's about 1 out of every 9. Climate change is so changing many continents and crops that it's getting worse. And now President Trump has proposed a policy where he's going to cut aid to many African nations. And the United Nations is in a panic over this. They said this could lead to perhaps as many as 20 million people going hungry. They're going to starve to death in African nations if they don't get that federal funding from America. And it says one United Nations source said this is the largest humanitarian crisis since the creation of the United Nations. And they're trying to figure out what they can do to convince President Trump to continue that American government aid. So we have terrible famine, and it could be growing much worse. And like I said, could this be an obvious one of the 10 signs of the end as we get closer and closer to some sort of tipping point? We all agree that something big seems to be getting closer.
My recollection was that there was a lot of discussion of turmoil in the Middle East. Are there any of the signs that point to specific things happening in the Middle East, maybe specific things as it relates to Jerusalem and so forth? Is that anything that you picked up on in your research?
You certainly hear a lot of that from televangelists such as Reverend Hal Lindsey. He has a program that I will tune in and watch once in a while, and he feels that there are forces gathering for a military invasion of Israel, and they are pretty much surrounded by enemies and really need our support. And hopefully we will continue to support them as they are a democracy and they are our friends in the Middle East. But it is certainly possible that we could see a lot of turmoil from that area. And once again, nations will rise against nations and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be wars and rumors of war. Jesus warned us about that. So you would think that this stuff could be stopped. But sometimes you just think we're hurtling, down a path that we're destined to do these terrible things, whether reasonable people are around and decrying and protesting against this or not.
Tell us a little bit about the characters in the novel.
I created a fictional character since I'm a man. I wrote for a lead hero of being the male star of the what I feel like could be an entertaining movie. He's a former Olympic boxer who runs a restaurant on the coast in Miami, on Virginia Key. It's part of the Miami area. And one of the threads I wanted to put together in a story someday is I heard a number of times that people in South Florida really love it when it storms big time because it'll drive old sunken ships and treasure on shore, either into the shallow waters or right up onto the beach. And people go running out to check after a storm with metal detectors or just all hunched over looking for any little trinkets or bits of wood from sunken ships. And so I have the character running a beachfront restaurant, and guess what he finds? He finds a clay jar that has a clue inside. He's got an artifact that is, I don't think, ever been put into a novel form. and he goes in search of 2 other artifacts that are from the crucifixion. And I don't want to give too much away, but they are 3 items that were thrust upon Jesus just before he was executed by the Romans. And we have to have our heroes, the character's name, Rigatoni Rhodes. He runs a restaurant. And Rig and his friends go and piece together the clues and find the artifacts before the bad guys, the villains, can get their hands on them. So they have some adventures at sea in Bimini or Bimini. And then I have a sequel already written, and I'm already working on a 3rd one to create a trilogy. So I don't want to give too much away. But there is one sign that I put in my 2nd book that is an interesting clue to look for if we really are on the road to a polar shift and the return of Christ. Can we really believe Edgar Cayce and Ruth Montgomery and such? And one sign to factor in, if we see this happen, we'll know we're on the road and there's nothing that can stop it. And I put that into the 2nd book. It is deals with a volcano erupting in Italy and what will happen to America shortly thereafter.
So what would be your advice for people having this insight? What would you suggest? I mean, maybe the best question is, how has it changed the way maybe you live your life?
That's a good question, and I'm not someone used to giving much advice to people and telling them how to live their lives. I think basically they should make their own choices and the government should butt out, but that's just me. If I were to give advice, I would tell people to stay strong, especially those in the Christian faith. And even if we don't make it to the end of days or a pole shift, we still have our souls and we have an afterlife that is promised to be a wonderful place for us all. And so if you, in the meantime, have a home, you might want to prepare your basement with basic supplies for food and drink and keeping clean with fresh water and stocking up on some tools that are not reliant on electricity, no power tools, and just basically prepare like perhaps you would for an earthquake, because you never know what might happen. And so it couldn't hurt to do these things, but I wouldn't get too carried away. I wouldn't become what they call maybe a prepper, but do a little preparation sure couldn't hurt.
I think that's just generally good advice, whether you believe in the second coming or you just believe that the world is a scary place. You know, having some provisions on hand, I just think is why. Even in the case of something like a power outage, I remember, this had to have been, my goodness, 12 or 13 years ago. The eastern part of the United States, a big chunk of it, including where I live, didn't have electricity for about 18 hours. And it was a very strange feeling to walk out your door in a suburb where you have street lights and everything, and there was not one light. The water wasn't working because at that time the water pumps were dependent in the Cleveland, Ohio area. And there was a huge swath of the United States or the eastern U.S. that didn't have power for about, I think it was probably about 18 hours. And they somehow blamed it on a downed power line somewhere in Ohio, and it just sounded very shady to me. It sounded like there was probably some other explanation, but that kind of told me, hey, it doesn't hurt to have some extra provisions on hand. Well, this is a fascinating topic, and I know some people may take issue with this, but again, when we talk about this and we talk about Christianity, and it goes both ways. You know, I'll talk to people of the Christian faith and say, I don't believe in all that supernatural stuff. And I'm like, wait a minute. I think you do, and you just don't realize it. Yeah. And then on the other hand, I talk to the paranormal people, and it's like, I'm interested in the paranormal and the supernatural. And it's like, well, I think this is pretty supernatural if this is true. So I think it's perfectly appropriate for the program. And Paul Smith, I appreciate you coming on the show. Where can people find your book and more information about this?
You can go to arguspublishing.com. They have the book in e-Kindle form, e-book form, all kinds of methods to get it in that way. You can order it, have it shipped for free to yourself. I always prefer a hard physical copy, to flip through and carry around. They should have it available through Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. Once again, it's called The Treasure Keys to Christ's Return, and that's a reference to not only the two keys that I list in the book of a pole shift and the people's attitudes changing towards brotherhood amongst mankind to lay the foundation for the return of Christ, but also the lead character in my adventure finds two keys to open a special box that has a special grand prize in it, and I won't tell you what, so you wouldn't have a little surprise for you at the end of the book. But you can access it in those manners. And also you can contact me on Facebook if you have any questions. I also send out some Twitter that on askdavid.com. So I sure thank you for having me on the show and being able to promote this unique kind of first book in a trilogy. And I hope it'll be successful, that you'll be able to read number 2. And maybe we can talk about it someday later in the year, perhaps.
Well, it'd be my pleasure. Paul Blake Smith, thank you for joining us today on the program.
Thank you for having me. Goodbye.
Well, thank you for listening to this edition of the Paranormal Podcast. We hope that you will rate, review, and specifically subscribe to us on wherever you listen to your podcasts, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, so on and so forth. We appreciate it very much, and we'll talk to you next time on the Paranormal Podcast. Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye. Now for the legal disclaimer. We do not accept money from publishers or content producers in exchange for interviews. However, as with most media outlets, in the majority of cases, we do receive complimentary copies of books and DVDs that we feature on our podcasts. Your purchases of books, DVDs, and other items via our Amazon.com links benefit Jim Harold and JimHarold.com and help us continue our programming. The sponsor messages you hear on the programs are paid endorsements, although we really do like them. For the full disclaimer, go to JimHarold.com, and thanks for listening.